guys.
Good morning, Angry Canuck and everybody else. This is Agreeing with Preppers, an occasional series I do where I agree with preppers online and try and add a little bit into the mix. And the Angry Canuck did a really good video, and I'll be showing bits of this, hopefully with his permission. It's a good video, and he explains why he has looked at the issues of inserting a tampon into a gunshot, and possibly, he doesn't mention it, but a knife wound in SHTF is a bad idea.
So earlier today I was on Facebook looking through some of the groups that I'm a member of. I'm a member of, I don't know, a dozen or so different groups about prepping and survival and whatnot.
I don't really use Facebook. I kind of got a Huples cat channel, I think, somewhere or other. Once a year I might look at it. You want to brand yourself. You want to get out there on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, BitChute. You know, you want to get your brand out there to attract people to come to your channel. I don't really care. If people find my channel, that's great. If they don't find it, well, great. I don't do this to do channel growth, so I tend to avoid Facebook. But what I have seen on Facebook from prepper groups is almost entirely an utter waste of time. It's recycled articles, out of context usually. The comments usually are just like, even worse than YouTube comments. They are pretty low IQ comments in the main. So I tend not to look at Facebook. So I'm glad Angry Canuck looked at it, and I'm glad he's actually caring enough to try and correct some of the myths he's seeing.
I get involved in some of the conversations sometimes. And I saw this post from this guy about talking about how he had went out and bought tampons to use to plug bullet holes and shit hit the fan.
Public service announcement. I do not ever like to see people driving and shooting a video. It is distracted driving. It will eventually cause an accident or even death of somebody. I see it all the time in prepping. If you've got somebody to say to me, stop the car and pay me, the video camera, the full attention. Now, that being said, the Angry Canuck is a professional truck driver, so I'm the last person, because I can't even drive, to tell him about that. But bearing in mind, as a professional truck driver, his experience behind the wheel is vastly superior to almost everybody out there who's driving and shooting prepper videos. You see it all the time. Blah, 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 blah. Don't do it.
And so I went in and I asked the guys, like, you do understand what bullets do to the human body, right? Like, they don't just make a hole.
So inserting a tampon, this comes of course from the Vietnam War era, where a bunch of 18, 19-year-old American GIs who were mostly stoned, most of them were, decided that they didn't have enough field dressing kits, because they didn't, and they started carrying tampons in their bandanas and cigarettes and stuff like that, in their helmet bandanas, and they would shove them in and hope for the best. Doesn't take much exploration to look at what the death rates were from gunshot trauma in Vietnam compared to what they were in Afghanistan, and you might see the difference. So I fundamentally disagree with inserting tampons into yourself, ever. And this is what I said about it a long time ago. So in nursing and healthcare we call filling a cavity inside the body packing. It's called packing a wound, and it's like the worst name ever, because we don't mean completely filling the wound and stuffing the edges tight. What they mean is loosely filling the wound so fluids and toxins and pus can drain out and the new tissue can granulate, grow inwards like this. If you stuff a material into a hole in the body and hope it'll heal, and you stuff it in tight, it will not grow, it will not heal, and it's real trouble getting out. So one of the problems with a tampon is because it's designed to absorb large amounts of fluids, most tampons in most cavities that you would have, especially from bullet wounds, will absorb and crush the edges of the wound. Now a lot of people, because they don't know anything about healthcare, think that that's a good idea because it stops bleeding. Yeah, it does. It might stop bleeding. Probably wouldn't stop arterial bleeding anyway, which is the bleeding that's going to kill you. But it will prevent wound healing. And it's also going to cause probable tissue necrosis, death, the internal tissue, other than the stuff that's already been damaged. So that's why I'm saying never insert a tampon into a human body unless it's into the vagina and you're putting it in yourself. The other thing with inserting stuff into the body is that you have to take it out. In SHTF, you're not waiting for the paramedics to show up and you're not flying them out, and it can't be taken out in an OR. So you have to be careful what you do it. So to re-emphasize my points, the tampon is not sterile. This is sterile. Almost all studies have shown that Israeli dressing, any sort of expensive packing, is the same as using a cheap gauze. It's sterile. You don't really want to pack the wound, you don't really want to stuff it in, you want to loosely fill it if you need to. But before you're loosely filling all of this stuff, you really need to get any debris out. When you've been shot, generally speaking, you're not naked. And even if you're naked, there's a high chance of external germs and stuff going inside the body. You need to really flush it out with saline, normal saline. 0.9% normal saline. If you can, you need to explore the wound with sterile tweezers and a strong flashlight and remove any dead bits, any bits of metal, any bits of bone, any bits of hair, any bits of clothing, any bits of grass, any bits of soil. You really want to spend a lot of time doing that. Now, depending on the depth of the wound and where the wound is, you're probably, as Angry says, going to need a surgeon. And in Grit Down, you're going to be the surgeon.
I mean, the bullet goes into your body, it tears apart, it breaks bones, it rips apart organs, it ruptures blood vessels and arteries and dislocates joints and splinters bone fragments throughout the body. I mean, it's nasty. And if you have something like a hollow point, for example, where they mushroom or or sometimes bullets will splinter into many different pieces and fly off in 3, 4, 5 different directions, and then you got pieces of the bullet all over the place, even though it just went in through one hole. It doesn't come out the back.
So the other problem with tampon is that a tampon is actually designed, I know this is tough for people to understand who aren't female, but a tampon is designed to wick blood away from the womb and contain it. So it does two things. It doesn't stop blood flow, it attracts blood into it, and it swells dramatically. I suggest you get a tampon and put it in a glass of water and see what happens.
It doesn't matter. I mean, you plug the hole, you're still, the patient is still bleeding to death inside their body, even if you are able to prevent the blood from, externally exiting the body.
In of itself, the compression might actually stop some small bleeding. It won't stop arterial bleeding at all, but it will cause local pressure on any healthy part of the wound that's inside. It will pressurize that and stop blood flow to that surface, which will cause that surface to die, to necrose, which will further increase the high probability of sepsis.
Of course, you're going to try something to mitigate the damage in some way. I mean, but I'm afraid a tampon's not the answer.
So after an hour or two, you come banging on my door and you say, Huples, I've been shot because I think SHTF's a Hollywood movie. And I try and get this tampon out. It's going to be really difficult to get it out. And I'm going to be really angry at you for putting it in, because you're actually making it not better, you're making it worse.
If there's pieces of bullet in somebody and you don't have a hospital or a doctor around to do surgery properly and deal with that shit, well, you might have to try to remove it yourself.
So I would point you to the original dressing video I did on penetrating trauma in SHTF, how to deal with it. It's not in depth, it doesn't go into a lot of jargon, but it actually gives you some tools and some methodology to actually deal with stuff.
If they've got busted up and ruptured organs, they're probably going to die. If you get shot and shit hit the fan, there's a very, very high likelihood you're going to die. If not from the wound, if not from bleeding to death or, drowning on your own blood or something nasty like that, it could just simply be from an infection if you don't have antibiotics, but there's a high likelihood you're going to die.
Know where the pressure points are. If you've been shot in the arm here, you want to put pressure here. You need to know where the arteries are close to the bone so you can compress them. You want to know how to use a tourniquet as close to but above the wound as possible. Now that's arguable, I'm not getting into it. If it doesn't work, you can always use 2 tourniquets, which is actually probably what most of us should do if you're not that familiar with the application of a tourniquet. But again, tourniquets have risks, etc., but risk compared to blood loss, death, you have to figure that out. The other thing you can do is you can pack it. And packing means loosely putting in material like this. This is cling, this will do just fine. And then when you take this out, you pour normal saline, 0.9% saline, hopefully sterile, onto this, let it soak, and then pull it out. Never pull out dry dressings. That's the other thing with tampons. They're going to dry out inside the body because the body's hot. And it's going to be really tough and cause damage coming out. So this is sterile, and it's about the same price as a tampon, and you'll actually be able to pack a much deeper wound with much more control. You'll be able to stop local blood bleeding from this inside the wound without causing necrosis, death of the good tissue, and you'll be able to remove it quite easily. Why you wouldn't stick this in your hat, why you'd stick a tampon in your hat, it's how people's minds worked back in the 60s, and they were all stoned, I would point that out. It's 2020. If you want to go online, on Facebook or anywhere else, and promote garbage, consider yourself a D as a prepper and an F as a human being.
My advice is not as a medical professional, but as somebody who was trained to do combat. And I get that it's been a long time, but you know what, the nature of combat doesn't change. As somebody who was trained to do combat, my advice would be, don't get shot.
So this is why I'm in favour of gun control. I also live in Canada. We don't have the Second Amendment. I think the Second Amendment is flat out wrong. Well, I think the Second Amendment's right. I think well-organised militias should have access to guns and not anybody else shouldn't. But that's an interpretation. I know it's triggering Americans. The main reason I'm in favour of gun control as a prepper, gun control means you have to restrict access to guns, right? So restricted access to guns means it's less likely that somebody's going to have a gun and shoot me in SHTF. Now I understand Second Amendment, blah blah blah, it's part of being an American, a white American. Gun control for blacks and Latinos has been heavily enforced in the States for many, many decades. But the other issue with the gun control is that in SHTF, if you have to fight, if you have to use a gun, and you may well have to, and you should have access to a gun, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't have guns, I'm not saying ban guns. It's like, ooh, gun control, banning guns, taking away my right to own a gun. You have no right to own a gun, you have no right to drive a car if you are unsafe using them. So the issue for me is what level of gun control and who enforces it. That's an entirely political issue, I'm not going to get into it. But please listen to what Angry said. Do not get shot in SHTF. If you have to use a gun, shoot them in the back. Don't stand up, as you see all the time on prepper videos, all the time on Hollywood movies, people standing behind cars, bullets go straight through cars, honestly, and then they'll go through you. Bullets ricochet, bullets can turn around corners, bullets can all do all sorts of major weird things. So if you can own a gun, you're responsible for the safe use of that gun. And safe use of the gun in SHTF means that you don't get shot at. If you're being shot at, you're highly likely to be shot. And in SHTF, that means you'll probably die.
And if you do, hope that the person treating you has a little more than a tampon on hand to deal with the injury. Tampons to treat both.
Well, I hope you like that. Just a quick message as well about menstrual pads. Menstrual pads are also not sterile. Menstrual pads are also designed to wick blood flow into the middle of it. And like tampons, menstrual pads are not designed for the quantity of blood that you'll be faced if you're stabbed, shot, or fall on a spike in SHTF. Get proper equipment. It doesn't cost that much. It really doesn't. You don't really need a huge amount of it. Though I would argue if you've been shot, you're going to need trash bags full of dressing material, and the person will still probably die. So learn about actual anatomy and physiology. Go to St. John's, go to Red Cross, do CERT training, and then spread the wisdom that you've figured out online, or as Angry did, serve for your country and then talk about stuff like this. There's far too many people online who have definitive 100% opinions about everything and are spreading misinformation. And what kills me is they're not being roundly told off. It shows me that there's a vast information gap. In the information age of the internet, people have so much access to information, but they don't seem to have retained anything of value. Anyway, toodles and thanks very much, Angry. Have a great day. Oh, and this is for you, Angry. Marmalade. Mommy.